in an era when there was a case study approach. But I've coached teams, I think for any of y'all that have ever looked, the weight teams are all across the spectrum, right? So we have weight teams that are hardcore race, hardcore gender, down to like, trust me, it's one-off hedge and framework. Right? That's how we're going to do it. So at Wake, we have every end of the spectrum, and we try to recruit coaches with the coaching at every end of the spectrum so the debaters can do what they want. But I don't have a particular. Sorry, here.
I guess I'm having trouble finding how you can get any offense for teams that are just like increased accessibility in the debate space. Because all the offense you can put on are like things like framework, or like we agree with that, we just think that it should be more accessible.
I think if you stop thinking about it in terms of trying to push the argument out and just start debating argument straight up, you'll find a huge set of literature. Right? Now the question is, do you have that burden? Right? If you actually sat down and took somebody up on the thesis of their argument, did they increase accessibility in the debate space? And then you talk about the method that they do that by, their approach that they do that by, and actually rolled up your sleeves and got into the lit, you would see there is a huge amount of it. The question is it your burden or not? Do you have time or not? Is it fair to say to somebody who has to prep for the entirety of the resolution, oh, by the way, here's my one little cool tricky thing I do that you should be ready for? Assuming you answer that question, which is the question of framework, assuming you answer that question with, I don't care, I'm just going to beat you. I mean, think for a moment just about a little bit about the sets of literature involved here, right? So if somebody's an Afro-pessimism civil society bad team, then Georgetown in the quarters of the NDT, if you go watch the tape, Georgetown versus Rutgers, Georgetown did not say the words framework. They just beat them on you're wrong in your descriptions about anti-blackness and you're wrong in your solution. We think about a solution through CAP, and they just won, right? So you can beat people straight up on their arguments, right? But the question is, are you willing to actually engage? Or are you going to say, I don't want to have to engage, I'm not going to go into that literature base because it's too far off the point of stasis I'm prepared for, so I want to just be able to win, the point of stasis is more important. Who was after over here? Yeah.
I'm with George, kind of like, what's the best way to tailor like a counter-interpretation to have a good stasis, or how you think this debate should be like about?
Yeah, counter-interpretations are almost always self-serving. That's the problem, right? Just like a roll of the ballot. Right? If somebody says, the role of the ballot is to figure out who should win the debate based on who's over 6 feet tall. Ha ha! Right? That's what they oftentimes sound like, right? Like the role of the ballot is my act. Whichever team does my act wins. Well, look at that, I'm act. The same thing is true for counterinterpretations. If your counterinterpretation is totally self-serving, then I don't think it carries a whole lot of persuasive weight. I think you're way better off at saying, here's a conceptual counterinterpretation we're prepared to defend. We just think the app should have to answer the question of the resolution with yes. We don't give a crap if you use poetry to do that. We don't give a crap if you, do the form of evidence you arrive at that, we don't care. We don't think you should have to role play. You don't want to be the USFG, that's fine. Don't pretend to be them. But we think at the end point of the affirmative, you should have answered the question of the resolution. Should the United States federal government do something? Well, yes. So that's our counterinterpretation. That gives us a fair amount of ground. That means the ground we can have is we know we can always say no, the United States federal government shouldn't act. We think we should be able to say no, that ocean policy is not that big of a deal or problem, whatever it is. And you don't have to pretend to be the United States federal government, but you do have to say what they should do. Do I follow that? That would be an example of a counterinterpretation. Now what I did there is an example of what you need to do, which is to explain what the counterinterpretation includes and excludes. Because I think what a lot of teams are really good at is saying, here's why my counterinterpretation is good, but they just don't hedge their bets and say, here's what's not in my counterinterpretation. I'm not trying to force you to do this. I'm not trying to force you to do that. I just want you to do this. You follow? But it's going to be arbitrary, right? I mean, it just is. A counterinterpretation is, by definition, your attempt to recenter the debate or the point of stasis into a different direction. So you got to be able to defend the advantages and disadvantages of doing it. Next. Yeah.
Do you think a micro-political strategy approach needs to have a defense of why state action and the topic area action is bad, or just a reason why focusing on things like out there is bad?
It could be both. It sort of depends on what your argument is. I would say that the best neg teams are really good at demonstrating micro-political resistance fails because it doesn't engage the larger structures or institutions. Right? So if you say micro-political resistance, I want to deal with, say, the relationship of socioeconomic status and debate. Like, just is class and debate a really big deal? If the neg just stands up and is like, you can't even begin to talk about socioeconomic status unless you're going to talk about the following 10 loopholes that make rich people rich based on the tax code alone. Like, is it anyone amazed that General Electric, one of the greatest companies in the history of the world, has not paid $1 in taxes in the past decade? They just haven't paid $1. How can a company, in the one hand, report to their people who are their investors, here's the billions of dollars we made, and then when they turn around and tell the federal government, they say, we made literally nothing or lost money? How is that possible, right? Well, the answer to that question is an awesome paper, if you're interested in it, that Malcolm Gordon did on the corporate tax reform, where a corporation submits 2 versions of their profit loss sheet. One to the government and one to their investors. And no one forces them to be the same. And if you force them to be the same, and said to a company, you either have to tell your investors you lost a bunch of money, so you don't pay taxes, and then therefore lose all the people who flee from your company, or you can be honest with your investors that you made a bunch of money, but you then got to pay taxes on it. Does that make sense? That would be an example of how you would try to tie to your micro-political resistance you were doing in the debate space. I would try to tie the need to have some discussion about the larger structures and institutions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you got to pick carefully what your offense is in micro-political resistance, because if they can tie it to a larger structure, you might be in trouble.
And then, do you think your 2 maxims at the top of the lecture about community change would answer that back?
I don't know. Not a whole lot of people believe that. I mean, that's something that came out of a conversation with Scott Harris while he and I were trying to stop the debate community from imploding, so I don't know.
Okay.
How do you answer arguments about authenticity when debating with team you know? When you switch affirmatives when you're debating with team you know, is it going to say read to your framework?
This is a big deal because we had like an hour-long conversation about this in our lab last night. It may be the case we just need to have an actual lecture about this for the whole group. I don't know how difficult it would be to find out that. The honest answer to that question is I don't think that I have an answer that's going to satisfy everyone's perspective on that. So what we should maybe do instead is actually have a lecture where somebody thinks through the issues on that and presents it, either in your lab or to the audience at large. Because even in brainstorming last night, we had very little consensus in our own room about that. So I don't know that I certainly can't give you a 30-second answer. Anything else? Yeah.
Do you think debate would ever split?
Debate has a history of split. Almost every version of debate is split. If you read Bill Keefe's book on this, it's phenomenal. Bill Keefe basically says that in response to the most competitive, highly professional versions of a forensic activity, another activity always is created for people who don't want to do it at that level, right? So it's when PF becomes what you all are, which I know for some of you might think that's insane, but now it has workshops, now at the top levels pretty fast, once they have mutual preferred judging and they abandon the idea of having a random citizens judge. Once PF becomes fast, specialized jargon with its own set of judges, it's only a matter of time before somebody raises their hand and says, no, we need a version of the activity that is not that, starts a different version of the activity, and it could be what's happening right now in Parlier Worlds, and then eventually that becomes, but the argument Bill Keefe makes is that every version of the activity, once you get buy-in from the students, progresses towards what you all do, which is the highest, most competitive version of the activity. Because if you're going to dedicate this much of your life to something and you're a raging dork, you want to debate the other raging dorks at the best. You don't want to have artificial constraints put on you like speak slowly. Or maybe you want to speak slowly, you don't want to speak fast, and you don't want to deal with the artificial constraints put on you by speak quickly. Right? All those things are things that can change. But yeah, debating is an issue, so it always is. It's surprising it's made this long without another split. No.
Do you think though, like, that it can split not just based on like the level of competition that's occurring, but like the
Yeah, CETA, when it split from the NDT initially, was a direct response to the content and style of NDT debate. So
they split, are they merged back together
Yep.
again?
they remerged in 1995, 96, over the point of stasis. The NDT side agreed, we will debate your topic if CETA agrees that it's a policy topic and you debate it all year, which was the difference. CETA used to debate one topic in the first semester and a different topic in the second semester. I think part of the reason why you can see a whole lot of split in high school debate, to be honest with you, in large part is with the professionalism of the actual NFL. Now, most people here will mock the NFL tournament, but the NFL as an organization is brilliant. They have a paid executive director that does grant writing. The UDLs have paid executive directors with grant writing. I mean, once you get to the level of professionalization, when it's a bunch of coaches that get pissed off at each other, that's how it's way easier to split. When a bunch of high school or college coaches sit around with each other and say, like, I don't like what a tournament feels like or what's going on right now. Let's just do our own thing. Because as a general rule, we all come together totally voluntary. So it wouldn't take much for a group of college coaches to get together and say, we're just not feeling the way tournaments are going right now, let's do our own thing. If we had a national organization with a paid executive director with actual structures to grant, raise money, do development, I think it'd be harder. And I think it's like harder in high school. Okay, if the TOC evaporated overnight, it would be 3 or 4 years before it didn't matter anymore. Right? The only people that know about it are the people who have either seen somebody in it, debated at it, or want that to be their goal. If it wasn't possible for a kid who doesn't know anything about debate at this moment, would hear about the TOC. For instance, Pi Kappa Nationals was the NDT before the NDT. Wake Forest won it. The last year it was a thing, and then Wake Forest switched to NDT debate the next year. But when I brag about what championships we have, I can't really walk around and be like, Wake Forest won the last Pi Kappa National tournament. At the time it was a big deal, but nobody now knows what the hell it was. Does that make sense? Same thing is true. All right, one last question. Did we do our break? Anything? Awesome, now we do our break. So, yeah, how long is it?